welcome to the Skills Builder tutorial for how to sew lap zips. Okay, so some of you may have seen me teach this in person in classes, but this is what you're going to need for today. A seam gauge or other measuring tool, a zip. So this is a regular zip as opposed to a concealed zip. So the zip pull is on the front of your zip, and the teeth are on the front, which is different to the zip. The invisible zip. The invisible zip has the pull on the front, but the teeth are on the back. So this is your regular zip. Some fabric to insert your zip into. A sewing machine threaded up. Wonder tape or wash away quilter's tape. So I've got some of that here. So this is the double-sided quilter's tape. It just makes life a little easier, and you want a method to mark your fabric. So I'm going to use a pencil just so it's easy for you guys to see. Other bits you need are a zip foot. So it depends on your sewing machine what type of zip foot what your zip foot looks like, but this is what they look like for the Genome machine. It's foot E, and you can use either left or right side of this dependent on which side of the zip you are sewing. And the other type of zip foot you can buy to use on your machine are these adjustable zip foots, and you need to unscrew the screw and on your sewing machine and release the foot, and then screw this in, and then this little bit slides from side to side. So you've got options for your zip foot. This gives you a bit more visibility of what you're actually sewing and where you're sewing up to, but I'll be using the regular zip foot just because I think that's what most of you will have. If you have seen me demo this before, you may have seen that I like to use a zip that's longer than the required zip in the instructions. But I'm not going to do this for this demo. I'm going to do it so that you've got a zip the correct length for your project. So what you would need to do. So the reason I like to have it longer is that you don't have to try and negotiate around the zip pull itself. So if you imagine you are sewing down here and you've got this big zip pull. So you're sewing down here, you've got this big zip pull in the way. So what we'll do is we'll pull it down, we'll sew a certain amount, and then we'll pull it back up out of the way. But if you have a zip that's longer than your requirements, you can leave the zip pull over the top and cut it off after you've sewn it up. That's how I would normally demonstrate this, but today we are going to do it, so we're going to negotiate around this zip pull. This is the way that you will most commonly see this. So I'm just going to mark at the top. We want your zip stopper at the top to be well, you can either have it 1.5 centimetres or 5/8 from the top. That's your normal seam allowance. Or your other option would be to have it at 2 centimetres, in which case you may need to do a hook and eye or some other to finish that. But usually you would have a facing or a waistband or something like that on here. Lap zips are normally used for skirts or trousers or even for dresses. So you would always have something, a seam sewn across here at the top of your zip. So we're just going to mark now so that the top of the zip sits there, and then we want to do a marker here just where your zip stop is at the bottom. So we'll do another marker there. I will draw that on. So you would mark it on with chalk or with friction pen, anything like that will do. So now we're going to just stitch from here to the bottom with your regular 5/8 seam allowance. However you're finishing your seams, you would want to do that first. So whether you're using a zigzag or an overlocker, you would have already done that. I'm just starting a little bit below that marker with a 5/8 seam allowance, going to reverse back to the marker and then come forwards. lower edge of the seam. This is sort of from your zip to your hem on whatever garment it is you are creating. We're now going to press this open, but what we're going to do, we're going to press one side with the full 5/8 seam allowance, and the other side is just going to have 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to take my seam gauge to the ironing board, and I'm going to do that now. So we'll have the 5/8 on this side and then the 1/2 inch on the other side. Okay, so I'll just show you this here. We have got the 5/8 seam allowance on this side and the 1/2 inch on that side. So what happens is that the 5/8 seam allowance, the one with the 5/8 seam allowance overlaps the one with the 1/2 inch seam allowance. So this becomes your lap, the 5/8 seam allowance. So what we want to do is we want to place the zip on here like so. Turn that around so you can see it a bit better. We want to place this on here so that the zip pull is at the bottom here, and we've got that 2 centimetre seam allowance at the top edge here where we're going to place that. I will just mark that again so you can see that's where we want the top edge. I don't use pins, so we're going to use this Wonder Tape, which is wondrous. It means you don't have to mess about with sticking pins on. Double-sided sticky tape, basically, that you can sew through. This is the key. So it's called Wonder Tape or double-sided quilter's tape, and it means that you can stick this to your zip and then your zip to your fabric without any need to pin. And what that means is you can get a much smoother, neater finish, because pins can kind of create a bit of a wobble, and this can then replace basting, so it works out much quicker. You don't need to worry about it. It washes away when you wash your garment, so it's not even in there permanently, but it holds your fabric in place on the zip tape and does what you need it to. So it is readjustable as well, so if you aren't exactly how you need to be on here, you can readjust it. So you can see here we're nicely lined up close to those teeth, and then when we come and sew this side here, this will overlap over your first row of stitching. Okay, so we're going to sew down this left side of the zip first, the underlap. So I'm going to move the overlap out of the way. So follow your manufacturer's instructions. We're going to use the right hand side of the zip foot for this, keeping all your settings the same. So your stitch length is still your regular 2.5. Your needle position doesn't need to move, because this zip foot will keep you in place along the edge of your stitching. So if you can see where the needle is close to the edge of the fabric, about 1 millimetre from the edge of the fabric. The front of the zip foot kind of follows along the edge of the fabric, and there's a little groove under the zip foot where the teeth can sit. So you don't need to worry about kind of fighting against those zip teeth. So we're going to back tack to start with, reverse back to the beginning, so the starting edge, and then come forwards. And you just allow the zip foot to guide you. So we're going to come down to approximately halfway. Going to lift the presser foot, and we're going to zip this zip up and out of the way. Sorry, I just knocked the camera. Now it can be a little tricky, but you need to make sure that you're moving it so you've got enough space. That's why your needle needs to be down, because that will hold your position. And then we're going to come down and complete that side of the zip. Now you can see here, this is where your 1/2 inch seam allowance comes into itself, that you can continue to sew down the zip tape behind the seam allowance, like so. So we'll just remove all those thread tails. We don't want them to get caught up in our zip sewing. Go, we've got that first side of the zip sewn. Now what we need to do is we need to place this over the top, and we'll stick that down in the same way. So tape on here. So we're sticking the Wonder Tape to the zip tape about 1 millimetre away from the teeth, like so, the full length of the zip tape. Make sure it's pressed on well before you try and peel the backing off. Okay, so we've got that zip tape. Now we are just bringing the lapped side to lap over the original stitch line of the underlap side. Okay. And then at this point you can mark this for where you want to sew it. So you want to sew about 1/2 inch from the edge, and you want to sew down to where the zip pull is. You need to be careful not to sew over your metal zip pull. That will break your needle, so make sure that you are going beyond that. And we want a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so you can mark this with chalk. Obviously you don't want to mark it with pencil. I do sometimes use like a quilter's tape, which is like a very narrow masking tape, but it doesn't show up on this calico and wouldn't show up for you on the video, but you can use it if your fabric is contrasting, just to get this edge, so you can just tape that onto your fabric. Again, it's low tack and it removes easily, so you don't leave a mark on your fabric. So again, we have this zip pull to negotiate around. Just going to redraw that marker on at the top so we know where we're going here. So when we start off sewing, we can start with the overlap loose, but as we progress we'll then pull the zip pull up. So when we're sewing the left hand side of the zip, we want to move the zip foot over to the other side. What we're going to do, we're going to sew an L shape from the top, so we'll start here. We'll keep the edge of the foot with that line, so we've got a guide, and I've just moved my needle so that it is hitting where the line is. So I move my needle slightly to the left. We'll do a reverse here and then come forwards, and we're just keeping that front edge of the foot following the guideline that we have on here. Okay, so I'm just going to put the foot, press the needle down, pull the presser foot up, and just zip that zip up and out of the way, and then come down here and make sure we're beyond the zip pull, needle down to pivot, and then come across. Now as you come across here, I normally hand wheel it. It just gives you that little bit more control to get across here, and you want to finish right on your seam line there. Now you can back tack at this point. It's much neater if you don't back tack and you just pull this out and then use the needle to pull your threads through to the reverse and knot them off on the back side. So you'll end up with a much neater. You can also just kind of pull that stitch through. So just pull that stitch through, knot it. Like that. And then trim your threads off. So here we have our lovely lap zip. So we can see some of that tape, but like I said, that will wash away. You've got your nice neat zip there, and you've got your correct 5/8 seam allowance. There we go, and now we can sew our waistband or our facing, whatever we're finishing off the top edge of the garment with, we can sew that across the top there. Ta-da!